Hey, what's going on guys, it's Bagas here and welcome back to another review video. This time, it's Chased by Sea Monsters. Okay, you know what, I spent an entire 2 minutes trying to figure out what else to say and I really could not come up with anything else. So I guess here's your spoiler warning as usual and let's just start the review. Much like Chased by Dinosaurs before, Chased by Sea Monsters takes the formula for a nature documentary where a host explores the wilderness while talking to the camera. Except the premise this time around is that Nigel, returning as the host from Chased by Dinosaurs, visits the 7 deadliest seas of all time. To accomplish this premise effectively, it uses the Walking with Monsters formula as opposed to the Walking with Beasts or Walking with Dinosaurs formula, where there are 3 episodes with multiple time periods within each episode. However, rather than ordering them chronologically, it orders them from least deadly to the deadliest. Also similar to Walking with Monsters, this entry also has a transition scene between time periods, but whereas in Walking with Monsters is a scene of one creature evolving to another, this time it's in the form of a time map, and as usual I'll give my opinions on it later in the conclusion. The text that appears in the beginning of each new time period also makes a return. Now that that's done, let's move on to the individual episodes. Now, much like the Walking with Monsters review, which by the way you should definitely check out, instead of going episode by episode, I'll go segment by segment so that'll make more sense. After a brief introduction to the series, we travel back 450 million years ago to the Ordovician, and Nigel introduces us to a sea scorpion. And credit where credit is due, that animatronic looks so lifelike. I wouldn't even blame you if you thought that was real, especially if you're a kid. And I also apologize to those of you with arachnophobia. After that, Nigel finds a trial bed and uses it as bait to attract bigger predators, and he eventually does when something big cuts to the camera and Nigel attacks to the trial bite. He then follows it underwater where he meets more sea scorpions before encountering an orthocone that then has sea scorpions for lunch. Nigel then decides to hitch a ride on the orthocone before he returns to the shores and sees a mass spawning of sea scorpions, before proceeding to, quite literally, throw them out of the way. The segment ends by transitioning to the next segment, being the Triassic via the time map. The one thing I truly enjoyed about this segment is that I really like the science aspect of how the air has much more carbon dioxide due to the lack of plants, and also how the day is shorter by 3 hours due to Earth's faster rotation. So it's nice to learn something new, especially when it comes to these documentaries. In the Triassic, we first see Nigel on the beach with a bunch of familiar faces like Coelophysis and a bunch of pterosaurs. Also, quick side note, I find it funny how every time we see the Triassic, the environment is completely different. Like in Walking with Dinosaurs, it's a hot desert. Dead in Walking with Monsters, it's like a rocky plains. And here, it's like a tropical beach. I don't know, I just find it funny how it's so drastically different despite being in the same time period. But I guess that's also because Pangea is a massive continent. Anyways, Nigel then dives with some Nothosaurs and even rides one. And again, credit where credit is due, that Nothosaur animatronic looks amazing, and it's pretty much indistinguishable from the CGI model. After this, a tiny Strophius appears, and Nigel grabs its tail, only for it to drop it like a lizard. Not long after, the tail is suddenly eaten by a simple Spondylus. I think I pronounced that right. This thing is basically a primitive ichthyosaur, and after a brief tussle with it, the segment ends with a transition to the Devonian. At the beginning, we had a teaser of the main attraction, that being Dunkleosteus. Then Nigel fishes for bait, hooking a placoderm while the rest of the crew builds around a cage. And it does remind me of how people swim with great whites today. Nigel then enters the cage with the bait and a Stethocanthes appears. And thankfully this time it does not get eaten, but it is scared away when the Dunkleosteus arrives. Then it gets intense with the Dunkleosteus constantly slamming the cage, and you're on the edge of your seat thinking the cage might actually break apart. And to be fair, it does manage to dent the bars. Nigel then finally gives the bait to the Dunkleosteus, and it completely slices the placoderm in half, which, by the way, was also covered in chainmail. Then it also decides to dwell on cannibalism, eating a smaller Dunkleosteus. We then transition to the next segment, that being the Eocene. This segment starts with Nigel following the tracks of a large animal that turns out to be an Arsinoitherium. An animal that looks like a two-horned rhino, acts like a hippo, but is actually related to elephants. Nigel then tries to feed it an apple, but instead ends up being chased by the animal as it enters the water. He soon follows it underwater, encountering a pod of Dorodons, and it's nice to see them just peacefully swimming around, considering what happened the last time we saw these guys. And by the way, I really like the music in this scene. It's very relaxing. Nigel then sets off to find what he came here for, a Basilosaurus, and I particularly like the method Nigel uses, which is also a technique used on modern whales today. By recording the calls of the Basilosaurus, then playing those calls back into the water, to trick the animal into thinking there's another individual in its territory. It's a nice way of incorporating modern techniques into this prehistoric setting. After a while, a basilosaurus comes up to the boat, and considering the intensity of the previous segment, it's nice to see that this one is a lot more calm and peaceful, so we can just see the majesty of this creature. Also, there's some comic relief at the end when the basilosaurus bites off the speaker before it transitions to the plot scene. We first see a teaser to the beast we're about to meet, with Nigel holding the jaws of a great white shark before revealing the absolutely massive jaws of a megalodon. Then back on the ship, there's a debate on the next course of action, and to be honest, I'm quite surprised they only started this conversation now. Nigel then dives into the shallows to encounter some juvenile megalodon to see how they behave, and he finds a weird tusked whale called Odobenocetops before a shark suddenly appears out of nowhere. And mind you, that thing is supposedly only 3 years old, and it's already about the size of a large great white shark. Nigel and the crew then uses a dummy to create an attack so they can study the hunting strategy of the megalodon, which is actually a technique also used on modern great whites today, and once again it's a nice way of incorporating it. After that, the crew heads to open waters and use chum to lure a shark to their vicinity so that Nigel can attach the camera onto the shark. I like how the pace slows down at this part so that suspense can build up before showing us the iconic image of a dorsal fin. Oh, and by the way, is it just me or does that dorsal fin seem like it's going the wrong direction? I don't know, maybe it's just me. Even after the dorsal fin is revealed, the suspense builds up even more as Nigel enters the cage before the creature enters frame with a powerful score. And my goodness, that thing is gigantic. Eventually, after some persistence and being thrown overboard, he successfully attaches the camera, and through it, we witness the megalodon hunting and killing a whale, before it transitions us to the Jurassic. The penultimate segment starts with Nigel swimming with a school of Lizicthes while some cool music plays in the background. Then one of the Lizicthes gets attacked by a marine crocodile called Metriorhynchus and a horned shark called Hybotus. We then get a brief glimpse of a Liopleurodon, and there's also a fun scene where Nigel tests out his defense mechanism, this time being a smell suit, using different kinds of chemicals and seeing how the Liopleurodon react. Later at night, Nigel dives into the dark waters as a pair of Liopleurodons feast on the Lizicthes carcass. And then one of them gets a bit too close and Nigel releases the chemicals to deter the beast before heading to the final segment in the Cretaceous. This segment really upped the ante with Nigel swimming only meters away from two feasting Goliaths, and if it wasn't for the smell suit, Nigel would have definitely been lunch. Or dinner, I guess. And that just reminds you of the danger level we're currently at. The final segment begins with Nigel in the middle of a flock of Hesperornis. Basically, these guys are penguins that are much meaner and also have teeth in their beaks. And Nigel explains how this sea is chock full of predators, and that's why it's the deadliest sea of all time, and he also calls it Hell's Aquarium. And I think that's a very fitting nickname. He even says it's far too dangerous to swim in it. We first see a preview of the predators as Nigel approaches a bloodbath. We see sharks and a weird fish called Xiphactinus that literally swallows a Hesperornis whole, and a small species of mosasaur. I like how they reuse the defense mechanisms from the previous segment like the acoustic tracking device while also using new ones like the ROV. And through the ROV we see a pod of elasmosaurs and then an Archelon appears and Nigel just couldn't resist riding it. However, this ends up being a massive mistake as the tracker picks up something big, and I like how there's a mini fake out in this scene, because we assume that the threat the scanner was detecting was a Xiphactinus, but instead it ends up being a family of giant mosasaurs that flip the boat over, leaving Nigel and the others in the water, as they try to swim back to the ship. And much like Chased by Dinosaurs, it ends with the crew supposedly getting eaten by the mosasaurs. I really enjoyed the fact that you can see how there's a significant increase in danger, even compared to the previous segment. I mean, if it weren't for the fact that the mosasaurs decided that the boat was a much more favorable target, Nigel and the crew would have definitely been eaten. And I really appreciate the fact that they went all out with the finale, and if you remember, that was one of my biggest criticisms of my journey, not going all out. So I commend them for improving on that aspect. In my humble opinion, I do think Chased by Sea Monsters is the best out of the entire Walking With series. The premise alone is intriguing, and actually due to the premise, with each new time period we automatically feel an increase in tension and danger, despite us not even knowing what Nigel will encounter. This is further backed up by the defense mechanisms Nigel uses, because with each new sea Nigel essentially upgrades his defenses, starting with only a chainmail suit in the Ordovician, but then using an electric Prod in the Triassic, and the Cage in the Devonian, and so on and so on. From the defense mechanisms alone, you can kind of feel where the danger level is at. And I also like how they use different and interesting defense mechanisms to keep it from becoming repetitive. I also enjoyed how the show builds up the reveal of the creature. And I noticed they either do a slow build up before revealing it with a massive musical score, or they just reveal it without any warning at all. One builds up suspense while the other surprises us. Nigel is also just as good here as he is in Chased by Dinosaurs. Despite the much more serious tone, he still maintains a mostly lighthearted and fun personality. I also like how we get to see more of the crew and witness Nigel's interactions with them. Makes it feel a lot more lifelike. The CGI is also spectacular. I mean, just look at how the lighting is on the backs of the creatures. That right there just shows how fantastic the CGI has come, especially considering the fact that this came out in 2003. The time map is also a good way to link the time periods in a visually interesting way, much like the evolution scenes in Walk with Monsters, and considering the fact that we also jump back and forth between time periods, it's far more essential here so that the audience doesn't get confused on where we are. Also, one thing I forgot to mention in my Chase by Dinosaurs review is that these two shows really gives us a clear sense of scale of the creatures. Before, we could really only compare the creatures with each other, but now that we have humans to compare it to, we can see the true size of the creatures compared to a human. Overall, I really don't have any problems with this series. It takes the fast-paced nature of Walking with Monsters that I really enjoyed, alongside the lighthearted tone of Chased by Dinosaurs, while improving on the aspects that make Walking with Dinosaurs so amazing in the first place. So I truly believe that this entry takes the crown as the best in the Walking with series, at least in my opinion. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave like, subscribe, and my god, I gotta say, God, I literally just messed up the outro. God. Okay, anyways, I had a lot to say about this entry, and the script is already like over 2,000 words long, but I kid you not, there's a legitimate chance that I might actually have forgotten to put something, so that's the potential to become even longer. After this, we still have two more entries to go, with that being Battle of Big Al and War with Caveman. And after that, I guess I'll be free to review whatever I want, and since the Walking series will be over with. And is there anything else I want to say? I mean, this video is gonna be fun to edit, isn't it? It's gonna be really fun to edit. Anyway, yeah, you know what? This video is already long enough as it is. I don't need to extend it even more, so I'll see you in the next video. Bye.